I'm Vanessa Joy, and here are 5 reasons why your photos are blurry as f***. Honestly, I know your pain. I know what it's like to take a picture, look at the back of your camera and think, I'm awesome! And then you bring that same picture onto your computer and you're like, I suck. And you do. Well, no, you don't. You don't really suck. Before we even start, let me assure you, everyone takes blurry photos. I don't care if they post only the sharp ones, there were blurry ones. I promise you. So don't get so hard on yourself that some of your pictures are blurry. But there are things you can do to prevent the blurriness. Nobody likes a blurry photo. In all of the photos that I take for my clients, if I see a blurry photo, it is garbage. It is in the garbage. They do not see it. We don't talk about it ever again. Okay, number 1 reason, and probably the most common reason why your photos are blurry, is motion blur. Motion blur happens when your shutter speed is too slow, either for how much you're moving around or how much your subject is moving around. Now, depending on what camera system that you have, you do have ways of combating motion blur, either with image stabilization in your camera or image stabilization in your lens, or both. And there are different focus settings and preferences, I guess, that you can set in different cameras that will aid you with certain types of like motion blur with panning and things like that. So, but ultimately the rule of thumb, as they say, and I hate that because I learned what that expression came from and I don't agree, but I still use it. The rule of thumb, the rule of heels, is that you do not shoot with a shutter speed that is any lower than the focal length of your camera, of your lens. So that means if you're shooting with a 50mm lens, do not go below a 50th of a second. For me, I'm super shaky, plus I move really fast, plus my subjects are moving fast and shooting weddings. I tend to double that. So if I have a 50mm lens on, I'm not going lower than 1/100th of a second. Really, I try not to go lower than 200th of a second, almost at any point during the day. But if I have a 200mm lens on, let's just say my 70 to 200 2.8, even though that has image stabilization in it, I prefer to not go any lower than 250th of a second on that lens.
Before we jump into this, make sure that you download my free posing inspiration guide. We could all use some inspiration. Get that in the link below with lots of ideas on how to pose groups and individuals.
Though technically, if I held still, and here's how you can prevent some motion blur, you hold still, you brace your camera by holding it correctly, lens in palm. Not this. This is not stable, and it also hurts your shoulder. You hold it like this. Camera here, elbow in, hold your breath, and stop your heart from beating if you can. That will help you take a nice, steady photo. But ultimately, even though you could, with the image stabilization, go a little bit lower, you know, lots of things happening. You can't always just be like here, ready for it all the time. So that's one reason that you have blurry photos, is motion blur. So fix it with shutter speed and hold still. The second most common reason that you will have blurry photos is that your depth of field is too shallow and you are not controlling it enough. This is very common these days because it's currently a trend to shoot at rather low apertures, which is beautiful and it gives you a nice blurry background and a dreamy look. However, if you're shooting at 1.2, your depth of field is like the size of an eyelash. So even if you focus your camera and between the time of you focusing and actually taking the photo, you or your subject happen to breathe, you're probably going to be out of focus. Now, with newer technology, focusing has become a little bit easier, especially if you're using a mirrorless camera. A mirrorless camera gives you a little bit more ease in shooting at more shallow apertures. So Personally, with the EOS R, I will shoot closer to 1.2 or 1.4 and not have a problem with it at all. For lots of physics reasons, that's actually the case, it being a little bit easier to shoot at a shallow aperture on the mirrorless camera versus on a DSLR. What you want to avoid if you are shooting with a shallow aperture is having to focus and recompose. So that's when maybe you have your focus point set just to the center and you're constantly focusing and then moving your camera to actually have the composition that you want. Just that little movement from here to here can throw your photo out of focus when you're shooting at a shallow aperture. I highly suggest, if you're using a DSLR, to use a single point focus. That's what I'm doing with my Canon 1DX Mark II. I move it around wherever I'm shooting, so my composition is done first, and then I'm moving around the focus to where I want it to be. If I'm shooting with my mirrorless camera, then I'm going to have my thumb moving around on the screen telling my camera where to focus. There's a lot of new technology coming out right now, especially with that new Canon 1DX Mark III, which is so much fun, and I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I can tell you the autofocus is going to blow your mind. It is incredible, and it's going to make shooting at shallow apertures much, much easier. The next reason why your pictures might look out of focus is because you're shooting with a really high ISO. That high ISO is going to make your photos appear much more blurry because you're going to see all the noise come through in the image. It does matter what camera you have. Certain cameras, brands, levels of that camera can handle ISO much cleaner, but still, the higher in ISO you go, the less clean of an image that you're going to get, making it appear a bit soft and out of focus, even, by the way, if it's not out of focus. The fourth reason that your pictures might look out of focus is because your camera and your images, rather, are pixelated. What does that mean? Maybe you're shooting with a camera that has less megapixels, so that when you blow it up, or if you're cropping it in a whole bunch, you start to see the megapixels, the little tiny dots and things that make up the image. If you have a lower resolution camera, you're going to end up seeing the pixels come up. So it's going to end up looking kind of blurry, kind of muddy, not quite as crisp and clean as you want it to. That was 4 things, and I know I promised 5 things, but I kind of combined the first 2. It was supposed to be shutter speed is your first problem, and then people, your subjects moving is another. So I swear, I still give you 5 things, but it's just kind of combined in those first 2 right there. Learning how to focus is an art in itself, and it's going to take time and it's going to take practice, but it is worth it to have that kind of confidence to take pictures that are in focus. So if you're having any one of these problems, work on it and hone in your craft. And again, remember, everybody takes out of focus pictures. I promise you, everyone does it. It's okay. Well, it's not okay. Don't actually do it, but learn how to control your focus better and become a better photographer. I hope this has helped you make sure that you don't take blurry photos. Do hit the bell. Do hit subscribe for more videos like this one. I'm Vanessa Joy.